Good morning and thank you for joining me on our webinar today, which is What is Workplace Mediation? I'm Louise Rance and I'm part of an organisation called Clover HR, and we are your trusted people advisors. So to tell you a little bit more about Clover HR, we're here to help in any way that we can. We have over 150 years of experience between us all. So with that, we can ensure that you can get the best advice and service that we can give. We all have our specialisms in area of people, from recruitment, training, coaching, well-being, rewards, mediation, and many other people strategies. The photograph that you can see of us there was taken last March. That was the last team meeting where we could all physically get together. We have had quite a few people join us since then. So when we can all get together, we will have another team photograph done. We are, of course, having virtual meetings, but we've not been able to physically be together, pretty much like everybody else. So to tell you a bit more about myself, as I said, my name is Louise Rance. I am the HR business partner and a workplace mediator. You can see my email address there, louise@cloverhr.co.uk, with my phone number, and that is the Clover website number as well, which has got lots of information on about the sorts of things that we offer and the companies that we work with. Regarding a little bit about my background, I have only over 20 years experience in HR in various roles, which includes HR manager, HR business partner, employee relations manager, and I've worked for a number of award-winning companies, including Manchester United, Great Places Housing Group, Calico Homes, and Job Centre Plus. I'm a qualified workplace mediator. I've a national certificate in workplace mediation. I'm also a long-standing member of the CIPD. I'm a chartered member of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. So regarding questions on our webinar this morning, you have got the Q&A function, which you can use to ask questions throughout the webinar, or there's the chat function. I will take questions at the end so that the webinar flows. And if we have got time at the end, I will take questions over the webinar as well. We'll have to see how the time goes. But I really welcome your questions. And obviously, if there's any questions that you think of after the webinar, you can, of course, email me or ring me or get in touch with me through the Clover HR website. So I have muted all your microphones just to ensure that the webinar can flow freely, but I will unmute everybody at the end. So to go through what we're going to cover today, so we're going to look at what is workplace mediation, how does it work, what's it all about. Going to be examining the causes and costs of conflict at work. Then looking at some hints and tips around, okay, I'm dealing with conflict, what do I do? We're going to examine the grievance procedures and look a little bit about why they seldom work in terms of getting us to a win-win situation. Going to examine the role of workplace mediation and go into more of the detail about how workplace mediation actually works in practice. Then we'll have a summary and next steps and have time for a Q&A at the end of the webinar. So what is workplace mediation? This is a description of mediation. It's a non-adversarial system for resolving conflicts and disputes. And it's used as an alternative to formal or legal processes. And that will become clearer as we go through the webinar. So let's look at some of the causes of conflict, starting with relationship breakdown. The root cause of most issues of conflict to do with relationship breakdown, and that can happen for a number of reasons. Some of it's to do with communication. So what I'm communicating to you might not be actually what you hear or interpret in the way that I wanted you to. And there can be a variety of reasons for that. It could be to do with noise in the workplace. If you are in a workplace, if you're in an office or factory, things can be misheard. If you're operating like a lot of us are virtually at the moment in virtual meetings, then body language can be misinterpreted. It may be that we have, and we all do, have assumptions and prejudices. Sometimes these are referred to as unconscious bias, where we interpret through a filter about what we are being told or shown, and it's not necessarily the message that the person giving the message wants us to hear. And if there's no check of the understanding of that message between person A communicating it and person B listening to it, that's when misunderstandings can take place, and that can all add into relationships becoming strained and potentially breaking down. Moving on then to poorly defined job roles and unclear objectives. We work in a very fast-paced work environment, and the role that somebody might start with and the job description somebody might start their career in an organisation with can end up the role that they're actually doing being very different to that as things change and priorities change. And if there isn't an ongoing communication between, say, a manager and an employee about role expectations or role changes, then somebody can be doing a role, carrying out objectives that they think is what their manager wants, and actually it's not what the manager wants or what the organisation wants. Change has happened, but the communication hasn't kept pace. And it can be between team members. There's misunderstandings about what somebody's job role is because of this pace of change as well. So I have an expectation that you would do X, Y, Z because that's how I perceive your role, but that might not be your perception. And again, that's to do with communication and understanding. And moving on to talk about managers who may lack competence to manage conflict, particularly in the early stages. And this is not a criticism, there are reasons for this. So it may be that a manager hasn't been trained in how to spot the signs of conflict and manage it. And therefore they're wary about intervening, possibly thinking that they might make things worse. And sometimes the temptation can be, well, I've ignored it, maybe it'll resolve, maybe it'll go away. But oftentimes it doesn't. A manager might not perceive managing conflict as being part of their role. Managers' roles are often very busy. There are a lot of operational demands on them. And especially if they work for a larger company, they may think that actually managing conflict is something that HR will do or their manager will do. It's not part of their remit. And if conflict starts low level, but no intervention is made or recognition of what's going on, it can very quickly escalate to proportions where formal procedures are in play, and that can bring issues all by itself. Another cause of conflict, change processes and revised working practices. And this is something we're experiencing a lot at the moment because most companies, nearly all companies, have had to change their working processes and revise the working practices in line with dealing with COVID and the effects of that. And if change processes aren't managed sensitively and communicated, and along with them any revised working practices are not discussed and agreed, then that can be a cause for conflict. And people react to change in different ways. And if there's not an understanding about why people may be reacting the way they are and provisions put in place to help them through that process, again, it's a cause for conflict. Then there can be clashes between individuals about task completion, a bit about what I was saying before. Somebody might have one priority and another person has got a different priority or different standards about how tasks should be completed. And then personal values or goals or expectations. So we've all got our own worldview. They're not all going to be the same. And if there hasn't been an exploration about those values, discussion about those values, that can be a cause for conflict. What I might hold dear as being really important might not be the same as somebody else. So then moving on to look at the costs of conflict. Costs of conflict. If conflict is not handled and managed, it can lead to a decline in performance, increased absenteeism, and a decline in employee well-being. So if there's conflict in a workplace, you may see an increase in people going on sick leave or long-term sick leave, an increase of cases of people citing workplace stress as a reason for absence, an increase in mental health issues, anxiety, depression. There can be an increase in physical symptoms as well as a result of stress. And all that can lead to a decline in employee well-being. There's a threat if conflict is not managed and resolved to business effectiveness, because if there's a decline in performance, that is going to ultimately affect an organisation's effectiveness. It will affect their reputation and customer experience, because if employees aren't performing to the optimum, then it's unlikely they're going to be able to provide the customer experience that the company or organisation is wanting. It can affect team working when there's conflict within teams or even between teams, and ultimately that affects the competitive advantage of the organisation. Some statistics here. So the cost to UK employers is £32 billion a year in lost working days, and that's from a source from the CIPD. So that is obviously a huge amount of money that companies and organisations could be using in different ways and probably to better effect, apart from the human cost as well. And if it becomes that conflict, if it's not resolved and it leads to formal processes like grievance procedures, disciplinary procedures, and they may lead to somebody leaving the organisation claiming constructive dismissal, then the average cost to an employer dealing with an employment tribunal claim is £20,000, which again is a lot of money, especially for a smaller organisation. It can be, but if conflict is not resolved and a disciplinary procedure ensues, and a disciplinary, the outcome of disciplinary may be that an organisation parts company with an employer, again, that can lead to a tribunal claim. It can lead to a tribunal claims on the grounds of bullying and harassment. So there are profound effects of the costs of conflict. So that's some of the picture of what causes conflict and what are the costs of conflict. So now let's look at, well, what do I do? What can be done about how to manage conflict? So some tips. Recognise the different ways people respond to conflict. So a little bit about the brain physiology really and our reaction to conflict. So conflict can trick us into behaving badly. Neurotransmitters in the brain are activated, and these neurotransmitters, I'm sure a lot of us come across cortisol and adrenaline. Conflict creates a stress reaction, of fight, flight, freeze, or fall. And when our bodies are in stress, these neurotransmitters are created, and the reason for that is there's a more primitive part of our brain, sometimes referred to as the reptilian part of our brain because it developed first, which reacts very, very quickly to stress or perceived stress to enable us to deal with it. So if you think back to the conditions that we would have lived in when we were hunter-gatherers, for instance, our bodies would have had to react very quickly to a physical threat. And this is what happens now, even though we don't normally have to deal with that level of physical threat. Stress and perceived stress has the same physiological reaction. So let's look at what this reaction means. So if somebody is in fight mode, then their belief is that they need to win at all costs. So you might see a more aggressive reaction in somebody that's in fight mode. They're going to fight whatever their perceived stress is. The problem when somebody's in the fight response is that they might achieve their short-term objectives, as in they achieve what they want to do, but the cost to that can be damaged relationships and ultimately isolation. And somebody that's in the fight response is in a mindset of I win, you lose. The belief being that you don't matter in this. If somebody's in the flight response, the beliefs at play there are that, well, I lose and you win. The payoffs for somebody that's in flight response is that they don't immediately have to deal with what they could perceive as an unpleasant situation. However, the effects on them can be that anger may build up and resentment over a period of time. And that can lead to a damage in terms of low self-worth. And that can have mental health repercussions as well. If somebody's in the freeze mode of the stress reaction, it's literally as it says, somebody really is going into panic mode and they've frozen, they don't really know how to react. And fall, we would see it as somebody just can't deal with the situation, and that's when people leave the organisation maybe quite quickly, and that again can have repercussions both for themselves and the organisation. So what do we do about this stress response? What we want to get people into is what we term a flow response, and this is a belief where you're looking for a win-win, and the belief is that we both matter. So let's look more about what that flow response looks like. And how do we move people into it? So how to move into flow? Again, what do I do? When two people are in a conflict or aggressive situation, and we observe this and we can spot it, then we can probably, after that incident has occurred, unless it's so bad you need to intervene right away, is to get that person into a private space and try and get them into an adult-to-adult interaction. The reason for this is when we engage somebody in a factual, logical discussion, it engages the more logical part of their brain, and that's what we refer to as going into an adult-to-adult interaction. So the emotion that has been created from the stress response starts to reduce. So you've observed maybe two of your team members or your employees in a heated discussion that's maybe got a bit out of hand. Then as soon as you can, after that's happened, speak to the both people that are involved, but on their own in a private space, and tell them what you've observed, tell them what you've overheard, and check with them what's happened, how do you feel about it, what potentially needs to change. And if you're using a calm demeanor and a calm way of expressing yourself, then people will tend to mirror that way of expressing themselves as well. So you get them into a calmer space, a more logical space. And when you're having these discussions, you're encouraging this flow of dialogue. You're demonstrating empathy and understanding of the situation. And in doing that, that encourages a mutual respect with a flow of ideas and a flow of trust. So you'd see, if two people had been in that conflict, you'd see them both in a private space. You find out what's happening, sort of do a debrief almost of what's happening, why has it happened, what might need to change. And we'll talk more about this when we go into the mediation stages, but as a manager or as a business owner, it's to engage in that kind of dialogue and conversation. And when you get somebody into that flow state, it does actually have a physiological effect, because it reduces those levels of cortisol and it increases the level of engagement. So when people are in this flow state, they're looking to achieve both their needs and looking for a win-win type of situation. And that final point is, as I've said before, having an honest conversation, pointing out observable behaviour, what you saw, what you observed, what you heard. And bearing in mind that all conflict stems from loss, perceived or real. So that loss could be that somebody perceives they have had a loss of status at work. They've had a loss of respect. It may be that if they feel their job role or is insecure, they may feel fear, a loss of employment and all that brings with it. But all conflict does stem from loss. And sometimes in that communication, what you're trying to do is establish what does somebody feel that the loss is, or the perceived loss is. So let's look at the ways that conflict is handled, and different methods, and some of the benefits and maybe some of the drawbacks. So pretty well all companies will have a grievance procedure, or if they don't have an actual grievance procedure, they will follow the ACAS guidelines for dealing with grievances. These involve formal procedures where somebody can raise a grievance about how they feel they've been treated, if they feel they've been treated unfairly or with disrespect. People can raise a grievance about any aspect of their employment. But it tends to be when there has been conflict that people will bring grievances if there's no other mechanism for them to try and resolve the situation. And there's issues with grievance procedures, which I'll talk about. Another option is to use internal mediation. A company may have trained internal mediators, and that can be very beneficial. There can be issues around that as well, which I'll go on to talk about. Or you can bring in an external mediator to go through a mediation process. So let's look at those in a bit more detail. So grievance procedures. The problem with grievance procedures is they often don't identify the root cause of a conflict, because you get so involved in the formal processes of somebody putting an allegation, going through interviews, investigation interviews, maybe somebody putting in a counter allegation. It can actually end up with a polarization of both parties' positions, and it can create a blame culture and ultimately a litigation culture if the grievance isn't resolved to somebody's satisfaction. They can still then potentially leave the organisation, bring in an employment tribunal claim, and so it goes on. Internal mediation, this can be very effective, but it is important that the internal mediators are trained and qualified. And parties that are in conflict may question if an internal employee can be truly objective and neutral in adopting the role of a mediator. And it's very important that A, the mediator is objective and neutral, and B, that they are perceived to be both those things as well. So let's look in more detail about external mediation and the qualities of a mediator and the qualities of a mediation. So a mediator is impartial. I've just seen a question come up on the screen, so thank you, Victoria. I will come to questions at the end, but please keep your questions coming. I'm seeing them pop up, and I will deal with them at the end of the webinar. So a mediator is impartial. The role of a mediator is not to take sides. It's to be non-judgmental. The mediator will be challenging in a constructive way during the mediation process. They will promote dialogue between the two parties, and they will manage a safe process. In that, it's that people feel psychologically and physically safe while they're going through a mediation. A mediator demonstrates empathy. They're empathic. They listen, which is a key skill, and they're looking to build understanding between the two parties, understanding of the situation, understanding between the two parties. The mediation itself is voluntary. This is a key aspect of mediation. If the two parties involved don't agree voluntarily to take part in the process, it really can't go ahead. It really has to be a voluntary process. It's confidential in that the actual nuts and bolts of what happens in a mediation is confidential. It may be that agreed actions at the end are shared, but that's with permission of both the parties involved, but it is a confidential process. It's empowering in that the solutions to the conflict are with the two parties involved. The mediator would act as a facilitator to that, but it is the two parties involved that really do the work around the mediation, and that's why it's empowering. I've mentioned that it's safe, it's objective. Again, the mediator's role is not to make judgments, not to make suggestions. The suggestions and the remedy all comes from the two parties involved. It's solution focused in that the ultimate aim of a mediation is to explore what's caused the conflict, explore what both parties want to gain from the mediation, what would be a solution to them, and then to form that into an agreed action plan. Mediation is respectful. It's respectful of all views. It's informal in that, although it's a structured process, it's informal in that it creates a safe space for people to air what they feel, what they think, what they want to happen. And again, I've referred already, it's neutral. So some of the benefits of mediation. The benefits of mediation are that the parties agree their own solutions. It's speedy in that a mediation can be done in one day, and quite often is, especially in these times when I am doing mediations virtually using Zoom. But even at times when we're not having to do just use virtual methods, and I can go out to organisations and companies, the mediation can quite often be done in one day, with meetings taking place with both parties in the morning and then joint meetings in the afternoon. And it's arranged quickly as well. It's adult to adult, again going back to those logical conversations, engaging the kind of the logical practical parts of us to come up with a solution. And once people are going through and have been through a conflict resolution process, it increases their skills to manage any potential conflict in the future, because they've actually been practicing, seeing those skills in action and using those skills themselves. It increases cohesion both between the two parties that were in conflict, but also within the wider team. Because if you have two team members in conflict, it has a knock-on effect to everybody else, and it can actually cause their stress levels to go up. So it increases cohesions with individuals, with teams, and then with the wider organisation. And it's cost effective. If you compare the costs of a mediation to the potential costs of the time that's spent going through formal procedures of grievances or disciplinaries, the time that might be spent then if unfortunately somebody does leave the organisation, is dismissed and it results in an employment tribunal claim, and the time and the costs of defending that. So looking at the model of mediation, Just had another question pop up. So yes, yeah, great question. I'll come to it at the end. So the mediation model itself, just to take you through the stages of that. The first part of a mediation would be if an organisation had contacted me to conduct a mediation for them, then I would ask them to speak to the two parties in conflict, explain that they'd contacted me and that they wanted a mediation to take place. I would send some documentation through as well to enable that discussion. Then if the two parties obviously agree that they want to go into the mediation, because as I said, it has to be voluntary, then I would contact both parties, and either by phone or by Zoom, and take them through what a mediation is, what it entails, what the structure of it is, find out from them if they're happy to take part in the process, and find out a bit from them about what they want to happen as a result of the mediation. What do they want to change? Once I've secured that commitment to mediate, I will then arrange, as I say, usually on one day in the morning, separate confidential meetings individually with both parties to find out from them what the background is, what has been happening, why has it been happening, what do they want to see changed. And within that meeting, I will be asking them to prepare a statement that they are happy to read out to the other party, which spells out what their experience has been and what they want to change. Obviously, I'll do that with both parties. And then in the afternoon, we will have a joint mediation meeting, which I will facilitate. So in that meeting, there is a safe and reserved space for the party A to read out their statement to party B, so it's uninterrupted. Then party B would read out their statement to party A, again uninterrupted. And then I will facilitate a joint discussion between the two parties to react to what has been said and to explore areas of agreement, to explore areas where there are actions that can be put in place that will help hopefully resolve some of these areas of conflict. In with those discussions, I'll also be discussing about what actions are they happy to be shared with the organisation, their agreed actions, which I must say the majority of people do agree to share those actions. And that will all ultimately lead to a signed agreement being created between the two parties, which they both keep copies of. And if they agree that those actions can be shared, I will share with the organisation of how they're going to go forward. So to give you an example, sometimes people make an agreement that they're going to have regular monthly reviews to look at work performance, any changes that have taken place, any general communications, and those meetings to be documented and to be an ongoing dialogue, really. So it can be that kind of thing that's in a signed agreement. It can be that if an issue's been that somebody feels they've been spoken to or criticised in front of other employees, it wasn't done in a confidential way, that could be part of agreement. If there's any work issues, they are conducting it in a confidential space. So there can be a whole host of things that go into that agreement, but they're very practical, smart objectives. And then following on from the agreement being signed and the actions shared, I would then do an evaluation of the mediation with the parties involved. And then I will do a follow-up, which will be at 1 month, 6 months, 9 months and 12 months, just to see how things are going. Is the agreement working or any other interventions needed? So in summary then, we have explored the causes and costs of conflict at work. We have considered techniques for dealing with conflict and looked at the options, including grievance procedures, internal mediation and external mediation. We've examined the benefits of external mediation, and we've looked at the actual practical stages involved in a mediation. If you want to explore if using an external mediator is right for your business or your organisation, then please do contact me by phone or email, or contact Clover HR, and we would be happy to discuss your requirements. If you have any questions now, I can answer them, or you can contact me following the webinar. So there are a couple of questions that came up during the Q&A. So one of those questions was, so how do we work mediation into formal procedures? Would mediation be before grievance or after grievance? And how do we equip managers with some of these skills to deal with conflict? Great questions. So first of all, about how we work mediation into formal procedures. Mediation can be worked into a company grievance or disciplinary policy as an additional stage. So it could be that before somebody actually raises a formal grievance, they are offered the opportunity of mediation. It can be worked into that policy that during a grievance, the grievance could be raised, but it could be postponed while a mediation takes place to see if that can resolve the issues. And if it does resolve the issues, then the grievance can be withdrawn. So mediation can be worked into various stages of a grievance policy and a disciplinary policy as well. So it doesn't take away somebody's right to go through formal processes, it just gives them another option. I have got a copy of a model grievance procedure that I can share if anybody would like that. About upskilling managers to manage conflict. We can run training, of course, from Clover HR or facilitated sessions to look at more detail into the skills of managing conflict, or we can recommend other training as well. So it's something that the Clover HR business partners, we can advise on that. But again, it's a great question. Okay, it looks like we're coming towards the end of our time. So I don't really have time to kind of go into a general discussion, but I am, of course, happy to answer any questions that you have. I'll put my details up here again. So again, I'm Louise Rance. I'm HR business partner for Clover HR. My telephone number is there, 0771 289 4327, or you can contact me on email, louise@cloverhr.co.uk, or you can go to our website, www.cloverhr.co.uk. I want to thank you all for your time and your participation this morning. We do have regular webinars that we run from Clover HR, so I would encourage you to have a look at our website. I am going to be running another webinar in February on mediation and looking more at the skills of handling conflict. So I do hope that you'll join me for that. Have a good rest of the day, and hopefully I'll see you all soon. Okay, take care. Bye.